Okay, question 5. And what is the simple planning method that is going to force you to write enough for top grades and force the examiner to think you have written a convincing argument? Well, luckily, the help is always in the actual question. So here is a past question. Scientists say that teenagers are not like adults. They learn and socialise differently and need sleep at different times. Education needs a radical rethink to meet students' needs. Lots of meat to pick off the bones, and this is how we unpick it. We're going to divide it up into parts. This question gives us 5 parts. Some give us 6, some give us 7, but they are generous. Let's look at the parts. We're going to say education needs to change. Why? Because teenagers learn differently to adults. Why else? Well, because they socialise differently to adults as well. And why else? Well, because they sleep at different times and have different sleep patterns. And then we're going to start offering some radical solutions based on those 3 things. And when we look at those solutions, we're going to think about meeting the needs of students, not exam boards or parents. So now I have 5 chunky paragraphs that I can write in a logical sequence that's going to lead me to top grades. How will I make each paragraph chunky and top grade worthy? Right, the second planning technique is to look at how those changes will make things different in 1 year, so immediately, but then if they continued, what would society be like in 10 years? And then let's think about your children or your grandchildren in 30 years' time. How would society be so much better then? Most students will only think about the immediate effects. They won't be thinking about the 10-year and 30-year consequences, and so their arguments just won't be as convincing. But once you delve into the long-term consequences to society, you're always way more convincing. And grade 8, grade 9, the marking criteria says a convincing argument. This is an easy way to get there. So I'll give you a brief taste of that. Let's say teenagers learn from gamification. So either cooperative games or games when they're in competition with others. Therefore, we're going to introduce that into classrooms with league tables and rewards and levelling up. In 1 year's time, that would lead to students being more interested, engaged and excited in their lessons. They would get more dopamine and they would associate that with learning. What would then happen? Well, over 10 years, we would reverse the trend of students not wanting to come to school and having high absence levels. What would be the 10-year consequence of that? Students would get higher grades. They would have more options post-18 for apprenticeships or university. They would have a better range of choice of job to go to. They would be more fulfilled when they start work. And in 30 years' time, a more fulfilled person is likely to be earning more or leading a life that they value. Both of these things are fantastic for society. Someone who is earning more is going to be a better parent simply because they can afford help when things go wrong. They will be able to educate their own children more easily before they even get to school, and then we will have a virtuous circle whereby gamifying learning in schools, we've increased the engagement and performance, and then the children of those lucky students who've had that gamified education will also benefit, and then as a society we will get more and more qualified, more and more intelligent, which will allow us to compete in the international markets against the massive populations of China and India and Brazil, who are going to dominate the next 30 years. You see how none of those ideas would come to anyone if they just think about the first year. But once you jump ahead to 10 years and 30 years, it's going to come to you easily. Your answer will be way better than anyone else's, and you're going to get top grades. Now, I will make a separate video, which I'll attach here, about how to do this precise question with all of the 5 points taken to these moments in the future. These are the persuasive techniques you should always try to use. Start with an anecdote, a little story that you can use to illustrate the point that you're going to argue. Then, a little later on, you will need a counter-argument. This is the most important thing that people who disagree with you will present. So you anticipate that and then say why that counter-argument is wrong and you are still right. You will need a conclusion that looks at that long-term future, because that is what's going to make you more convincing. And even more convincing is to use the Brucey bonus word society. You're not just changing life for you, for your school, for your town, but for everybody. That is always more convincing. So those are the ingredients in your paragraphs. What are the ingredients in your sentences? The most powerful rhetorical techniques are alliteration. Use as much of it as you can. Patterns of 3, lists of 3, repetition of 3 things, sentences in 3 parts. Any way you can get 3s into your writing, do it. It makes it more persuasive. Then we have metaphor. Sure, you can use simile, but metaphor is even better. The more metaphor you use, the more convincing your argument. You need emotive language. If you want something to be disgusting, use words that make it disgusting. If you want it to be fantastic and praiseworthy, use emotive words that make it sound amazing and wonderful and awesome. And then the easiest one of the lot, the rhetorical question. Can't imagine why people don't use it, but they don't. If you get grades 4, 5 and 6, I can pretty much be certain you're not using rhetorical questions. But if you use at least 3 in your answer, it's a sign that you're a grade 7 writer. I mean, it just kind of works as a formula. So steal the formula, write your rhetorical questions. The next 2 bits of advice you will never have heard before. So firstly, please don't make up statistics, and please don't make up experts unless you absolutely know that that expert sounds realistic to an adult and that statistic sounds realistic to an adult. Why is this so important? Because the examiner is marking how convincing you are. And as soon as you invent an expert who couldn't possibly exist and a statistic which the adult knows couldn't possibly be right, you've lost the power to convince. So avoid that at nearly all costs. I will not be inventing experts or statistics when I do the exam on Friday. Have a show-off sentence or more than one in which you go large, 30 words or more. You need, of course, to be really good at using commas and possibly colons in order to do this. But even if your punctuation goes wrong, the marks that you lose in AO6 won't be as damaging as the ones you gain for the content of your writing. So, go for a show-off sentence or 2. You can find detailed explanations about how I approach every single question in these ways on my website, or you can get hold of a guide for every single question at unbelievable value on my website, $4.99. Link is in the description. For our second paragraph, we're going to look at how students socialise. They love to be with their peers, and so we're going to use that either by getting them to cooperate with their peers or to compete against them. So lessons need to involve a lot of carefully designed talking tasks. They need to have useful things to discuss. We might decide to give them opposite points of view to argue to make it more interesting, to raise the level of challenge. We might set up formal debates so that they learn to argue. What teenager doesn't love to argue? They might demonstrate their learning through video, or they might, God forbid, make TikToks, or they might get their devices out and dictate their answers to them so that they could have verbal evidence of their learning, which of course is so much quicker than writing. In our third paragraph, we're going to focus on the sleeping patterns. Well, teenagers' brains don't work up until 10 o'clock at the earliest, so guess what? We ain't going to start school until 10 o'clock. School could then go on later, and the end of the day could be devoted to study and prep. You would not have to take any homework home. Homework would be for school, and home would be for socializing or whatever else you want to do. We know the benefits of exercise, and therefore every day would finish with some kind of exercise or creativity, something which will develop the student's passion, the student's voice, musical ability, drama, art, whatever you want. We're going to educate the whole child for their future life and not just narrowly focus on exams. Then we are going to get to our radical solutions. What if we condensed the 60-minute lesson into a 20-minute YouTube video? What if students were able to learn from the best teachers online instead of just relying on their teachers in school? We would then have a blend of live teaching and independent study, which would get students more quickly to higher grade ideas and learning. What if we didn't tell our students that they had to be educated with everybody their own age? Instead, they could just do it at the right stage. People who were brilliant at maths could learn maths with other people who were brilliant at maths, no matter what their age group. What if we allowed students to take their GCSEs when they were ready? Some at 13, some at 15, some at 16, some at 17, and so on. Imagine you could spread that awful load of 28 exam papers you're having to sit across 2 or 3 years of your schooling. Imagine what would happen to anxiety and stress. They would largely vanish. And then we could ask ourselves, what would school look like if it met students' real needs? Would students want to learn about finance or how to be entrepreneurs and run their own businesses? Not flipping GCSE business studies, which bores the pants off everyone, but actually running their own business now. Or they might want to develop a passion in the arts or sports. Let's bring in some artists. Let's bring in some trained coaches. What if we also wanted to educate students for the world of work and we said, hey, one afternoon a week, you're going to have a real job, and that's part of your curriculum. Off you go. What if we trained students on how to use AI more efficiently? And what if we taught them the secrets of happiness? This isn't an airy-fairy, touchy-feely sort of thing. It's a science of the brain. You can do that course at Harvard University in America. It is the most popular one, the happiness course. Who wouldn't love to do that? You would learn how to manage your own feelings, your disappointments, the way other people make you feel and disappoint you, and that would be part of your curriculum. That sort of learning will last for life, whereas the geography you learnt in year 7 and 8 probably ain't going to cut it. Now that we have our generated ideas, we're going to take them into 10 years and 30 years. So what will society be like? Well, students would be able to choose from a much wider variety of things to be successful at. Not just their further academic studies, but their passions, the interests that they will be able to follow in their spare time. Imagine the self-confidence they would develop with this kind of curriculum where they're constantly talking to their peers. This would lead to wider social networks, happier future lives, the ability to fit in wherever they are in society and succeed. People who are used to communicating with each other will no longer be doom scrolling on the telephone. They will seek out community. Villages and towns would be friendlier places as people got to know their neighbours. People realised the joy of being with others rather than isolated in their rooms or hiding behind a screen. Oh dear, this is getting a bit meta. Students who understood AI might not be put out of jobs by AI in the future, but would learn how to use AI as a partner, or a life coach, or a business coach, or a personal assistant. This will create a society in which people know how to live happily, know how to live independently, but yearn to live in a community. How's that for a conclusion? Nice rhyme, Mr. Salles. You don't always have to rhyme at the end, but I'm an English teacher. So that is how to chunk up your paragraphs with arguments that no one else is writing about, with arguments that will be convincing, therefore grade 8 or grade 9. I'll see you in the exam. Not bringing the spatula though.